Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday session of IT 604 IT Project Management. I'm going to go quickly over the material for this week, and then the goal is to show you how to use Project Libre and Microsoft Project to work with budgets. Now, we have to understand point at this juncture, we have worked with our schedule. So the goal leading up to this session was to create a schedule for your project in Microsoft Project or in Project Libre. That includes identifying the sequence of activities with work diagram and determining what the resources would be and what the time estimates are. So the point is really that in our schedule management knowledge area here, starts with plan schedule management, then defining the activities, etc., etc. Right now, the developed schedule activity would be a part of last week. It would be concluded. So this week we're going to look at how to get to the project budget from the project schedule. And that also means we will have to speak about project cost management. This also, go ahead and please open either the Husky Era MS Project file or the Husky Era Project Libre file. If you can follow along. Now, talk about project schedule management, which we've already done, of course. We're looking at all of these activities. Note that estimate activity resources in PMBOK 6 has been moved to the resource management knowledge area. And the whole idea here is that as soon as we know what the schedule will be, and again, as we go through the planning phase, of course, we will have a certain schedule risk that is still there, and we will know what the actual schedule really looks like kind of as we start the build phase here, or as we end the planning phase and we go into the executing phase. And even then, we are still looking at a little bit of a variance in terms of schedule. So now, last week, your end was this problem here, and we have here the network diagram for the tasks here. Tasks 8, as you can see, tasks 1 through 7 here, and then we also have the solution here for the plain net diagram with a forward path and the backward path. That shows us that all tasks here are basically on the critical path, except for task number 3, browser customization, and we're seeing here we have for early finish, late finish, 12 and 17, so that gives us 5 days of float. Why is float important? Because float can allow us to restructure tasks as long as they don't impact the critical path. As soon as the task impacts the critical path, of course, that's going to be a problem, because then we need to really ensure that task gets managed very well. So let's talk about schedule and schedule risk really quickly before we step into budget, because schedule risk is real. And our scenario here is that Mike, one of the 3 programmers that we have on the team for the HTTPS for the project here, could potentially be leaving Pros, our company, which means that we would be losing 1 out of 3 programmers, or 33% of our work power, of our manpower here, right? So this means that we can use a PERT approach in order to ensure that we really look at the correct durations for the work. So here, what I've done is in this table here, at the optimistic timeline, which is the original timeline, As you can see, 10, 10, 15 here, assuming that Mike is involved in these 4 tasks: public key and server setup, browser customization, port implementation, and testing. So original optimistic if Mike stays, right? So now we're going to add on 33% just in case Mike should be leaving. Okay, scenario, right? So now we're going to round those to full days, and that makes it easier to do schedule math. So now we have the optimistic and the pessimistic. Of course, we can also look at our PERT, at our most likely duration, because that is still missing for our PERT calculation. So in order to get to the most likely, let's assume that there's a 25% chance that I can, in fact, convince Mike to stay, which means there's a 75% chance that Mike will leave. So at this point, then, I'm going to take my duration here for the key and server setup. I'm going to say, well, pessimistically speaking, I'm going to have to add 33% onto that task in order to get my pessimistic day. However, those 33% are really only 75% likely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add on 30% times 75%, which gives me here the 12.475 a most likely value for the chance that Mike leaves. The same thing here with the port implementation, of course, where I'm looking at 5 days plus the 33% times the 75% gives me 6.23 days for, or 6 point almost 24 days for the most likely value that Mike is leaving, etc. This in the end really gives me, instead of a total duration for these tasks of 27 days, this gives me a total duration for these tasks of about 33.68, so kind of 34 days, right? We also get that if we take this most likely calculation, we round that. Here are the days. So now we have optimistic right here, we most likely, and our pessimistic value. And then we can start calculating our PERT value, which means our formula is optimistic for most likely, pessimistic divided 6, and gives me a value as a duration value for my activities about 33 days rather than the 27 days that we are that we were hoping for activities. So at this point, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the durations for public key and server setup. I'm going to increase that from the original 10 to 12 days. I'm going to increase the port implementation, given the math that I've done, from 5 to 6 days, right here. I increase the browser customization from 10 to days, right here. And to increase testing, well, it's kind of in the middle, you know, 2.4 is almost 2.5, and so that's kind of going towards 3 days. And to be on the safe side, I'm going to say, well, testing is going to take me, well, 2 or 3 days, you know, so I would probably work with 3. So now that my duration take into account that Mike might be leaving, I have a much better idea as to how to calculate my durations for these activities. So to the new values that I've calculated into my work diagram as the durations, and as you can see here for testing, I've picked 3. and I'm going to calculate the new float. And we're seeing if we compare our new adjusted durations in our network diagram, being from the original diagram, that instead of 19 days, the project is going to take 23 days. So we've gained 4 days. And we're also seeing that optimization task at an early finish of 12 and a late finish of 17. Now, early finish of 14 and the late finish of 20, which in fact gives it a day more of float, which is great, right? And because both these tasks, the public key server setup and the port implementation, are delayed. All right, now that we have all the durations and we've got our WBS, obviously, right? We've got our activity sequence, our activities relationships. We need to talk a little bit about rates, and we need to talk about project budget. So, cost management. Project cost management is the next process or next knowledge area in the PMBOK version 6, and it consists of these 4 processes: cost management, estimate costs, determine budget, and control costs. And some of these inputs here are, of course, the activities that we have in our schedule, the durations that we already have in our schedule, the resources, and contracts. Now, resources, when we talk about resources, we need to understand resources can be both people and materials, right? And we have people as resources. That seems a little bit heartless to talk about them that way, but remember that building a schedule and building a budget really is a mathematical exercise. So, costs are connected, as we can see here, and all of these activities here overlap in the planning phase, so we can see that as we plan our schedule management and our cost management, and as we perform all of these activities here down to developing the schedule, really we determine the budget at the same time. This is very important because remember, we have our triangle of scope and cost and schedule, scope, budget, and schedule, and will need to be in place really so that we can move into the executing phase. How we administer our scope or how we administer our budget and then our schedule, that is a very separate pair of shoes that we can approach as we go into the executing phase. But within the planning phase, we have to have a good idea as to what our scope is so we can price it and so that we can come up with some sort of schedule. That change, scope changes with change requests or with other methods of administering change, and that's what we will see next week when we talk about more agile or iterative ways of building a schedule and building a budget, specifically sprint planning and those kinds of things, right? So, but when we think about costs and when we think about cost estimating, we need to think about the rates that our team members will cost the project. That's not the money that they make. The money that they make will be less because the rate always has surcharges for, look at this, indirect costs, for example, on it, and also things like health insurance or any kinds of commission for our or for the HR department, depending on how the rate is calculated. So let's not confuse rate and or rate cost to the project and the pay that actual team member makes. They're very different, right? Yeah, thinking about these different kinds of costs, right? We need to start thinking about the direct costs, which are typically also called CapEx or capital costs. Those are the costs that is applied to the things onto the labor that is used up, that is consumed by the project. So, for example, programmer time. for example, well, specific software licenses that are not used anywhere else, for example, right? Or if they are appearing on or building and renting just for this one project, which has happened before, right? So, and then we have sunk costs which have already been invested in the project. Typically, when we speak of sunk costs, we talk about costs for which we cannot recover any benefit, right? And of course, there's always a learning curve, which is also an investment into the project. Like, for example, a new programmer who's coming on board who really has to learn how our organization works, what kind of the software cost is what it's often called, is available that we can work with, etc., etc., right? Direct costs are often project travel, because of course when I travel to a site to say install 50 laptops or 50 computers that are part of my project, then that travel is very specific to the project, so it's a direct cost. However, we have our indirect costs for things that are used but not used up by the project. So, for example, office rent, right? Power, right? I don't buy power just for one project. I buy power to power an entire office building in which people sit that also work on other projects. But every project has to pay just a little bit so that I can pay my power bill, right? So, of course, we also have what's called reserves. Reserves are contingency funds, usually 10%, that are being held in order to help finance risk mitigations. We'll talk about contingency funds a little bit more in management reserve when we get to risk management, which is one of the future knowledge areas that we'll talk about. So now, as schedule estimates and the example that we just walked through with our schedule estimate, we can also use PERT for our budget estimate. Remember the formula? Optimistic plus 4 times most likely plus pessimistic, right? So let's apply that to rates and to the people who work for us. And remember, here is our example again of Mike for the browser customization task specifically. So let's assume that Mike, level programmer who makes $100 an hour. Let's assume that Praveen makes $130 an hour and that Yolanda makes $50 an hour, and here are their levels. So most likely is that Mike stays, which that if the task takes 12 days, Mike is assigned at 100%, that's 96 hours at $100 an hour. That makes $9,600 for just that task if Mike executes it. Praveen, since he is one of our senior programmers, has some other projects running, but for those 12 days, he can dedicate 75% of his time, that is 6 hours each day, to our browser customization effort, which means over 12 days, he will be working 72 hours. At $130 of a rate, that's the cost to the project again, an hour, task will cost us $9,360. So here is our junior programmer. He is going to be, well, over allocated is what we say, really at 125%, which means she needs to work extra hard, 10 hours a day, in order to perform that browser customization. So we are going to budget 120 hours for her. At $50 an hour, however, this total task would cost us only $6,000. Well, here comes our PERT formula, and here you're seeing how a PERT formula is math that may or may not be appropriate to use, right? Let's say that our optimistic part would be Praveen would be doing this. We still know 75% likelihood, right? That most likely Mike's gonna stay. So take those $9,600 times 4, and pessimistic, we really we would like to help Yolanda out getting her feet wet with browser customization, but we also know that certainly there is going to be a risk associated with that, so I'm going to call it pessimistic here. And then you're seeing um, that given our formula, all of a sudden we end up with a budget value for this task of $8,960. Why is that? Well, that's because our pessimistic scenario is the $6,000, right? That really pushes the cost down. It's a good idea here. From my own experience, I would probably go with the higher value in my budget of $9,600, just because I know that there is a 75% chance that Mike is going to stay. So I would really not use the PERT value here, where previously was scheduled. It was certainly justified, right? But again, mathematically speaking, it's absolutely possible to do PERT calculations with budget as well. Let's talk about budgets and budget templates, right? There are two kinds of budget templates. One type of budget template is the plan phase budget template. I have one here that looks at, and you're seeing here, there's a phase for project design. Here we go, a section for project design, there's a section for project development, etc., right? And here we have labor hours, labor costs, materials costs, travel costs, other costs, right? And then the total per task here, right? So that's possible, right? That's a typical project budget for what you might find as you prepare a project for the kickoff meeting, so that you are allowed to go into the execution phase, right? Typically, that is structured based on the scope statement or the rolled up WBS. And what we're seeing here is we clearly see the overall cost here, right? So here we have as a phase of design development. I'm sure that before that there was initiation. I'm sure that afterwards there's a graph like this for project testing, for deployment, etc., right? So it's one way of documenting project budget, and this is the way that project budget is often documented in the planning phase. However, during the execution phase, all of that changes. Execution phase, we need to understand how much money we have used up, because as people work, people get paid, and as people get paid for their work, the funding is coming out of our project budget, so we need to keep track of that, right? And for that, we usually use a project budget tracking and reporting tool. In many cases, many organizations use Microsoft Excel for that still, or other applications specific to project budget tracking. Typically get Excel spreadsheets for that. The project tracking, if you are in a consultancy situation, can happen in hours. As a consultant, very often you're not allowed to know the rates of the other consultants. It can also happen if you're in a situation in which you are an employee and you do know the rates of the consultants, then you will be working with dollars here, as this second example shows, right? So here the template here is set up by project summary. We've got the phase 1, phase 2, which is identical to, or can be identical to, the 5 phases that we know for our project, or any other structure that will fit what the project to accomplish. And we'll be looking at that again when we talk about agile projects and iterative, and how to structure a schedule and a budget there, right? Typically, in that case, we can see here very small, it says estimated labor, estimated materials, and estimated total. kind of the information up here, because in the planning phase, all we have is estimates, right? But as we start moving into the execution phase with our project budget, that's when we look at the estimates right here, and then start pairing them with where it says actual labor, actual materials, actual total, right? Where we have to compare our estimates with the actuals. It gives us a good idea as to how good our estimates are on the one hand. On the other, of course, that also gives us a way to track whether we're spending too little money or too much, right? These are the two different ways in which you will find project budget templates. Now, for our assignment here, we have a budget template as well, and a template is part of the lab. Here, and as you download this project budget template, you see here this is a kind of a mixture of a resource plan. You are looking at a project manager, testing lead, etc., etc. So here are all of your roles that you can use, right? And the expertise. You see here that there's a rate table. And so here is an estimate workbook just specifically for these project resources. Why is that important? We always want to slice and dice our work in different ways, right? So, in a planning template, and it's going to put all of this together. Another project planning template is here. We have basically the same breakdown as we have here, just a little bit more colorful. So the point here is that as we finalize the project schedule and the project budget, we need to understand who our resources are. How much do they cost the project per hour, right? How much do they work? How much do they work as our estimate here? How much do they work for each month of the project, right? Because remember that each month, the sponsor or whoever's in charge of the finances has to release the money so that the resources can be paid for that month. Resources are released for an entire project with a duration of longer than a month or two, right? So this also means it's very important to understand how the resources break down. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. How does this break down over the duration of the project? So now having that, how does all of this fit together in project management software? First of all, if we go into Microsoft Project, I have here open the HTTPS file, which you have right here. You have right here the HTTPS exercise sample schedule. I have that open in Microsoft. I also have it open in Project Libre. It doesn't look like it, I do. Okay, so now as we go here, you see here you have a number of options on this ribbon. One of the things I want to draw your attention to is the resource part here. As you see, we have here a resource pool. We can assign resources, and in our assign resources template here, we have the resources for our team, right? So we all have our team planner here, right? And here's how this all fits together. So if I ask here my public key and server setup, right? I have here my processes, and here I have my resources. So for resource here, I have entered for John Smith, for example, 100% assignment to our project, and the cost is $2,400. How do I get to that? I get to that by looking at the resources, and by looking at my resource pool is my assignment of this, and I double click on a resource here. What we're doing is I have here my general information resource, available dates, availability, etc. The use is the assignment to the project. Type here is work, because people do work material. So then in my costs, I can enter the set rate, the overtime rate. If I have a per use cost, which really we don't have for people, we have that for materials, right? So here in this resource information with the costs, this is where I put my costs. I'll save that. I can assign resources to my project, and the hourly rate that I have added to the resource field, or to the resource screen that you just saw, be multiplied times the number of hours that included in here, for example, the 12 days customization, right? Browser customization. So this applies to all of my resources here. As you can see, for PERT implementing, Helga does that, right? Here, this is my cost right here. I can, in fact, let me go back, browser customization here. I can find another engineer here, let's say John Smith, right? If I assign John Smith at 100%, right, then I can, if I had entered his rate, then the rate would show up here as well. That's what we have right here. And so at this point then, how do I find not my cost per task? And you have this here in this project in your slides. Can I access my reports about costs in Microsoft project? Well, my reports about costs, you see this report button, this report ribbon here, right? This option. So let's take a look at that. This is Microsoft Project 2013. In your screenshots here is Microsoft Project 2010. Microsoft Project 2016 may look different. The one thing that you always want to look for is the reports. Now here it's a button, a ribbon, and here reports is an actual option in the ribbon itself, right? So in 2010, you click reports, it opens a screen with options for reports, and then you can pick a budget, right? And then that will generate for you this budget report. Reports in 2013 are a little bit different, right? But here is the complete cost per task. But here we have cost reports, right? Then we have a resource cost overview, earned value report, cost overruns, etc. What earned value is, we'll discuss when we talk about project quality. We have all sorts of other reports here. We can pick dashboards. We can pick pre-configured cost reports, right? We can also build our own report here, as you can see, right? So now here, for a cost report, how about we look at the, let's get on the earned value report. As you can see here, pretty cool. Even though seeing here that Microsoft Project still works with the definitions of ACWP, BCWP, BCWS, which have long since been replaced by different earned value calculations. But what you're seeing here is our estimate at completion, which is in fact our budget that we have right now. And then we will be talking about all the burn down curves, etc., that we'll see a little bit later. The reports, however, that can be directly run through Microsoft Project, right? We also have an option of just creating a cost overview or project overview dashboard here. And as we can see, our project overview dashboard gives us the percent complete of the project. That can be very useful for any kind of reporting. And then it gives us also the percent complete for all the tasks. For our cost overview that we have here, we have the rolled up cost status by phase here, and then we have the entire cumulative cost here that will show us how we are going to allocate cost by progress, right? Progress on our project right there. So those are some of the reporting options that we're seeing for some project. There are some other other cost overviews. We here have the task cost overview, which is the closest really to what we have right here. This is also an overview, right? But to show you that this can actually be generated directly through Microsoft Project, and that's the cool part. And many project managers or finance officers who know that, which is why so often project costs are still being tracked in Microsoft Excel. And then we have here our project as well in Project Libre. And if we look at our Gantt chart here, we have our task, not Gantt chart. Let me open this a little bit right there, right? And we have folks who are being allocated. We also see here that right here we can already enact our resource filter here, and this is where we can assign resources right here, right? Specific tasks. It's also what you will need for your schedule. Right? Highlight a task, assign resources to that task. Here you go, right? Or remove. And then for our resources here, add resources, we click the resources button, and that gives our resource sheet, which is pretty much equivalent to what we have in Microsoft Project as a task usage or as a resource usage sheet here, right? So we have here is the resource sheet that is identical pretty much to this, right? Project Libre at the bottom, Microsoft Project, same thing, really, right? So now here we can enter our rates directly to the resource sheet. You have the same option with Microsoft Project as well. Microsoft Project, you also have the individualized resource screen that I've shown you earlier. So, at that, for Project Libre, go back to our task here. We also have different ways of reporting. We can We can look for our reporting here. For example, to build a network, the WBS task usage report, right? And we have all sorts of other options for reporting, specifically the ones that you find in the View tab here. And so just usage, for example, just breakdown as resources are being used. The reports themselves can be configured right down here, right? So you hit report, and in the resource filter, you configure the report to run on cost or on actual cost, fixed cost. We'll see how that's going to work as we get into things a little bit later, right? So we have different options for histograms here and for cost curves, and I encourage you to take a look at these reports as you can completing the lab for the week and the work. So what is the work for this week? The work for this week is to complete the lynda.com course on project budgets, and then work with exactly this file that you've just seen open in my where's my Gantt chart here? Microsoft project, or in my project Libre itself. This is the basis for the discussion assignments, right? And you basically walk through exactly what I've just shown you. But in order to do that, you're going to I'm asking you to add 3 tasks. Here they are. So for your I'm asking your resource plan. Resource plan, of course, goes into the resource sheet that we've just seen, right here. Or if you use a project right here, enter your resource for your project, and use the reporting capabilities in order to run a report by task, or run a report by and run a report by budget, depending on which version of the software you have. Right. And so asking you to use this file here to enter your resource plan that way. Why is that? Because I want you to become comfortable with a very common tool that is being used within organizations, and that would be a Microsoft Excel based plan tool, which is what you're seeing here. So once you've done that, you see, and here are all the steps with their screenshots here. You've done all of this, you should have your entire cost for the project. Now, the entire cost for the project, of course, is going to have to be approved just as the is at the end of the planning phase. Those have been approved. The charter can be updated with those values, and once that is approved, then you're ready to go. And that means very often that you're ready to go design and execute, and that goes into the SDLC, it goes into the execution phase, right? However, once it is done in project budget, once it is done and is entered in Microsoft Project or whatever other project management tool your organization uses, that becomes what is called your project baseline. The baseline is what everything else, what your entire progress throughout the remaining phases is being measured against. So you really want your project baseline to be as realistic and as executable, that is, ready to execute as you can. Because the first thing to find out is that you forgot something in your scope, that you forgot to schedule, that you forgot to price. And all of a sudden, your entire baseline is being jeopardized. So all of that, thank you for showing up. For I see Navina and Madlam are online. Thank you. If there are any questions, please ask them now. And if you come into the chat tool, that would be great. Hi, Navina. If you have a question, go ahead and ask your question. Yes, this said we put in Blackboard. Absolutely, as usual. Thank you so much, everybody. And you have a wonderful day. And I look forward to seeing your labs. All right, I can end the recording at this point. I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye. End the recording.